So Anthony Joshua says he is more focused, more disciplined, and mentally strong. But some don't believe him, because the real question is not whether AJ is tough, it is whether Anthony Joshua truly believes in Anthony Joshua. So there was a great conversation about Anthony Joshua that I watched, and I feel that I can offer an interesting perspective. So let's go on this journey, and hopefully we can deepen our understanding. So the first point made in this conversation was that AJ is shutting down his businesses. So the premise here is that he said yes to too many businesses outside of boxing, and he has now closed them and he's made boxing his main focus. Now there's some thoughts I have with regards to this. And the first thought is a question. Does entrepreneurship affect boxing performance? Does entrepreneurship affect boxing performance? And when we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about entrepreneurship outside of him being an entrepreneur, being an athlete. And I guess that depends on his involvement in the business. Typically, if you have, and I'm assuming this would happen with Floyd Mayweather, he will have other people manage those other businesses. So it depends on his involvement. So maybe him having other businesses isn't the problem. Maybe it was his level of involvement, or maybe his emotional attachment to the business. However, with that being said, singular focus can be extremely effective. And he's making all the right sounds for, when you're saying that, yes, I'm just focusing on boxing, that to me is making all the right sounds. That to me is saying that, yes, you really want this. You're focused and you really want this. And the only thing I would add here is that from an outsider looking in, you don't necessarily have to shut down all your businesses. But what you should do, or what you could consider, is that if you do have a bunch of businesses, that you have a team managing those businesses and you're able to make that emotional shut off between your business. Because once your involvement in business compromises your focus in boxing, then we have an issue. And then the next statement is about a story that allegedly happened in the Canelo gym. And AJ was reportedly offered sparring at Canelo's gym, but he said no. And then the statement here, the connotation here is that this is a negative thing. But what I would say is, why did he say no? Was AJ not ready at the time to engage in sparring? Did he have other plans? Were there rival contenders at that gym? And who was he going to be sparring with? Sometimes if you look at other camps as other territories, you can look at it like that's someone trying to retrieve information, download data on my fighting style. Do I want to give up that information? So I'm not sure that this is necessarily a bad thing. Now, the counter argument here is that you're going into Canelo's gym and it's not just the sparring, it's the learning. It's, observing what goes on in a different environment, and that could actually benefit you. So I can definitely see that argument, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. So that one is dependent on context. And then the next turn of the conversation goes into the training with Usyk's camp. AJ, as most people know, has joined Usyk's camp to learn their habits. And what he likes is their prayer, their discipline, and their work ethic. I've always said this. Optimizing your boxing environment is essential as a boxer. And many people are key to optimizing your boxing environment. It's not just the boxer. It's the trainer. It's the team. It's the sparring partners. It's a collaborative effort. So seeing Usyk's team, and that's like the top of the top. That's like the person who's on top of the mountain. That's seeing a unique elite force at work. That is a beautiful experience. And for AJ to have the humility to be able to go over there and to download that information and to download that data, that can only be a good thing. My question here will be, will he continue to work with Usyk? And if he does, that would be great. And I think that could be potentially beneficial. But if he moves on, hopefully he can retain that data that he's extracted. So if the prayer, the discipline, and the work ethic works, even if he moves on from that environment, he can still keep that data. He can still keep those principles to make him the best version of himself. And as we get deeper into this conversation, there's a statement by Johnny Nelson, who was a really good boxer. And he states that he doesn't believe AJ. Johnny Nelson does not believe him. He thinks he talks about being mentally strong, but he's unsure whether he is mentally strong. When we think about that statement, first of all, only AJ knows the truth. But I would say, or I'd make an argument, that all boxers, to a certain extent, are mentally strong. But there's a sliding scale from 1 to 100. Let me explain. So let's assume that if you step in the ropes, you have a level of mental toughness. But there's a difference between having a level of mental toughness, let's say a 5 out of 10 or a 50 out of 100. And then you have people that are exceptional, that are in the 90s or 9 out of 10s. Let's name some names. Evander Holyfield, exceptionally tough. Rocky Marciano, exceptionally tough. Muhammad Ali, exceptionally tough. Joe Frazier, Marvin Hagler, Archie Moore, the list goes on and on. So I think it's unfair to say that Anthony Joshua is not mentally tough, but you could make an argument that he's not as mentally tough as the elite people in the past. So, and I think the nuance of that is important. Of course, AJ is mentally tough. He's a former 2-time heavyweight champion. He has earned his stripes. He has earned his credibility. But how tough is he? Is he elite level tough? And then the next point in that discussion is about his unfortunate tragedy that he has. And obviously RIP and my condolences. And Spencer Oliver, who I think is a great analyst, stated that a sad event may have changed AJ. And the question is, has it changed him for the better or for the worse within the boxing context? Does those tragedies influence future performances? For example, a tragedy can help you with being focused. It can help you with being stoic. But the point is that tragedy affects different people in different ways. I don't necessarily like talking about his tragedy other than saying my condolences and RIP. But clearly, when we have tragedies, they can have an impact. And then the conversation leads to the Dubois night, which creates a worry about, from their perspective, AJ's fitness and AJ's desire. And the worry that they vocalize is where he breaks when a fight gets really hard. I think it's important to, again, look at the context, because the context is important. In the Daniel Dubois fight, you can make the argument that AJ wasn't mentally broken. He was just physically knocked out. Matter of fact, in round 5, AJ hurt Daniel Dubois, and then Daniel Dubois landed a counter. So I think the premise of that argument, respectively, is wrong. I think AJ actually exhibited strength in that fight. The 5th round, he came back into the fight, but by taking a risk, he then walked into that great counterpunch. So I'm not sure that the AJ is mentally weak. Look at the Daniel Dubois reference is a correct reference, but I can understand why people may have that perception. And then the next thing is about a statement that AJ made with regards to how long has he got left. AJ has made some statements that he feels that he can fight at the top level for 3 or 4 more years. However, the panel thinks he may only have 1 or 2 fights left. It's so hard to determine how long a fighter has left, because how much you have left can be determined on the next couple of fights that you have. So, for example, if and when he fights Tyson Fury, if that is a massive, brutal fight, he may only have 1 fight left over that, or that might be it. However, if the fight turns out differently, then maybe he has more in the tank. I guess the question is, does a boxer know when father time has arrived? Obviously, we're using the term father time figuratively. Does the trainer know when father time has arrived, or do certain trainers know? And does the team know? Is it something that you can measure scientifically? Or is it something that is unseen? You know, one of the main things that maybe you could measure is the reflexes. The reflexes, the speed. They say that the power is the last thing to go. And the mindset, the mindset of someone. If someone has a damaged mindset, they're not going to be the best version of themselves. But it's always hard to qualify these type of statements. So here is my final statement on this issue. Think of this. Anthony Joshua has closed businesses. He has changed his environment. And he has made boxing the priority again. But none of that proves what is happening inside his mind. Only AJ knows the truth. The Dubois defeat was a knockout, not proof that he is mentally broke. So the real question is not whether Joshua is tough. It is whether this new focus can give him the belief to become dangerous at the highest level once again. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community, and that means I'm interested in your thoughts, I'm interested in your perspectives, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, press like, hype, and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.